He looked over at her and said, "Honey, I love your long flowing blonde hair.
Yeah.
So beautiful, I really love it." And she went the next day and had it cut off short. Unconsciously, she didn't know, she wasn't doing anything nasty to him.
Yeah.
But she just had to do something to push him away because their love was so precious to her, but so anxiety-provoking at the same time. And she was, of course, puzzled at his anger, you know.
Right.
Because it was innocent. She was in an unconscious process of withholding had started in her.
Isn't it amazing
without
how
her
many
even
of those sorts
realizing
of things we do?
So subtle.
And we don't
you know, the
even-
thing our partner particularly loved or valued about us, we stopped doing it. Or we don't have time for it anymore. And it's subtle. You know,
Isn't it? But isn't that also because people don't want to feel controlled? It's almost like a lot of the time, you know, and I know I've been guilty of this in my relationships, is that after a while, you know, all those things that you would do that would be nice that the person liked, you know, it's almost if they expect it, you don't want to do it anymore. And what is that? That's control?
I think it is, because it's taking something that was originally just a want and a desire
free
making it into a should.
Into an obligation.
And so that's that fantasy bond that now this person's controlling you. And particularly if you had a parent who tended to control you, you will see your partner is trying to control you, and they're going to take from you, and they want you to do all these things for them, and then you start to withhold it, and then they're mad, and then you see, they do expect me to do all these things. Let me just show you, see how they're acting? And then you've got the whole thing going pretty good. And also when there's a fantasy bond form, you start taking each other for granted. You know, the person becomes like your right arm, and you're no more attracted to them than you are to your right arm. So all of a sudden the sexual attraction is gone, and then you think, okay, well, you know, I'm just not attracted to them anymore, so I need a new partner. But you know, all these fixes of that somebody else is going to be for us, you know, even that relationship is very workable, because if they break the things that they're doing, if they become routinized, that have become habits, if they stop taking each other for granted, then the romance can come back into it. Then they can start to love and value each other when they start to take back those projections they've made onto each other. They can start to, you know, the old feelings, because especially if it was a decent choice in the beginning, which often there was some value to the choice. You know, two perfectly nice people get together, and you know, they're not perfect, but who is? You know, again, that perfect partner out there, the soulmate of ours, sorry, that may not exist, but this, you know, really decent choice of somebody where we do have common interests, we have some, you know, care about each other and concern, get together, and you know, there's a real exchange. But when there starts being that fantasy bond, replaces the real relating, there's a fantasy of still being in love, but the actual behaviors of acting loving drop out of it. And often what you get in your office, you know, as a therapist, is a warring couple. You have a laundry list of complaints about each other. But the minute one opens up and is willing to change a little bit, the other one, you know, often gets angry. Instead of going, wow, that would be great, they shut them down again. And so they're both playing their roles of keeping that fantasy going, but not really relating. And I think that's a very emotionally, well, it doesn't feel positive, it's a very like cocooned kind of safe feeling place. You're back in that old
sort of
relationship.
Emotionally deadened state.
Very deadened.
Some couples feel slightly content in it, and other couples are more warring. But even that contented state, they're still living in this fantasy of being in love, whereas they've just gotten into habits of relating. The regular, we go out for dinner on Saturday night, we have this on that, and this form of the relationship has replaced the substance, the real love and talking and communication they used to have. It's replaced by this form and these role-determined behaviors and rituals
that just kills
and things.
The relationship.
Makes
you know,
it really
and that's
dead.
why.
But it's so easy for that to happen. How do you remain aware so that it doesn't go that way?
Well, I think you have to really remain awake and paying attention to what's going on inside of you, to really fight off kind of those fantasies, and to really watch out for that coaching that's projecting, you know, onto your partner traits that aren't necessarily really there, and challenging those when you see them come up. I think you have to be open to feedback from your partner. When they tell you something, to really look for the kernel of truth in what they're saying instead of pointing out the flaws around the edges. And to be honest with your partner, you really have to know yourself. That's the hard part. Saying every little critical thought that pops in your mind is not being honest. It could be for the purpose of pushing the other person away or hurting them. So really knowing what your intentions are and looking at whether your behaviors, if you have integrity, your behaviors and your words match. So if you say you love the person, there's actually some behaviors that an outside observer could see and say, that was loving. Right. Instead of that was really mean and nasty. So, you know, it's looking at those kinds of things. And also I think it's being open to new experiences, continuing to share things, not narrowing your life down in relation to your partner, but inviting them in to open their life up to other things that you might want to try or do, being open to trying new things that your partner might bring into the relationship. You know, so it's keeping it alive, that the affection really being present and being important, making time for that. You know, the sexuality being an alive experience where both people are really fully relating and staying present. And that's a challenge for a lot of people, particularly combining love and intimacy and sexuality in that way. You know, which is what everybody would say they want in their relationships, or most people would say they want.
Well, once you have kids, a lot of people, it goes out the window, doesn't it?
It gets really difficult. The couple I was talking about earlier, they now have 2 young children, and what they find themselves caught up in doing after work is, you know, trying to get all these tasks done, you know, children fed and to bed and all of that. And the real close relating between them and the enjoying each other and the conversation and the making contact and the romance is kind of going out the window.
And then bills.
Yes.
Most people get caught
stress,
up in
especially these days.
And these days there's a lot of stress on families and on individuals. I mean, you know. And I think one of the worst things about this economic crisis, by the way, is that it starts a lot of negative thoughts in people. It really supports their negative voices and thoughts about themselves. And, you know, particularly if you get fired from a job, or if you're trying to look for work in this economy, or like if you've lost a lot of your investments, there's this feeling of feeling like a failure. And a lot of what there's part of what's troubling people is the real financial circumstances. But the other thing that's bothering them probably even more is the way they're thinking about themselves. And when they get into that negative spiral of thinking about themselves, they become much less functional in terms of looking for a job, in terms of making a plan, in terms of being able to even think clearly about those kinds of choices and decisions. And so I think it'd be really important for people to kind of reflect upon what's going on for them, and, you know, and really sort of understanding what's going on in their mind from what's happening, not just, you know, oh, these circumstances are making me so anxious or making me feel so badly, but what am I telling myself about these circumstances? What's going on in my mind? What am I hearing? You know, and often what comes up is self-critical thoughts from our past, you know, ways we were seen as a failure, ways we were seen critically as a child. And now this new situation, see, now it really proves it. You thought you were a success, but look, you've lost all that investment money. I mean, I have a colleague who, you know, was a professor for many years at a university, had accumulated and invested money, and now that's all been swindled away in one of these Ponzi schemes. And, you know, he's having to take the bus to work, you know, can't even afford a car, had to, you know, sell his property, is living in an apartment. I mean, you know, and I could just imagine what's going on in his head. He came from a very impoverished, pretty destitute background, and now he's back there fighting that, and now he's right back there. And, you know, you know, it's not just the circumstances, which would be frustrating to anybody and, you know, difficult to deal with, but what you're telling themselves and those old messages that are coming back, you know, you thought you were going to amount to something, look at, you're just a failure, you know, that kind of way of thinking is what really is troubling people, I think, even more than the situation.
More than the actual
thing. People